My name is Ivan Blumenthal. I am a retired pediatrician. For anyone that does not know much about the Lucy Letby case, you may find it helpful to watch my 3 earlier videos. Articles about Lucy Letby appear in the national press almost every few days. A wide range of prominent people have expressed views about this case. One of the most notable is former Supreme Court Judge Lord Jonathan Sumption. He states that Letby is likely innocent. On this slide are events that have occurred since my last video in February. In April, Letby's new barrister, Mark MacDonald, submitted her case to the CCRC in Birmingham after receiving the second part of the International Experts Panel report. In July, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that they were investigating more Letby cases that they had received from Cheshire Police. Since those police cases were submitted, Dr. Davy Evans, the main medical investigator, has reported another death to the police, which he has called Baby 17. In August, 3 hospital managers were arrested over gross negligence manslaughter. So far, there have been no charges. The Thirlwell inquiry, which was set up to look at events leading up to Letby's arrest and conviction, is due to report after Easter in 2026. This is Dr. Ravi Jayaram, the pediatric lead. In both Child K trials, he said that he walked into room 1 where he found Child K desaturating. Letby, who was with Child K, was doing nothing to revive her. The prosecution said that he had caught Letby virtually red-handed. At the Thirlwell inquiry, Dr. Jayaram said that it had been suggested to him that he had made that up, which is something he would refute. During Child K's trial and retrial, Dr. Jayaram was asked whether Letby called him while Child K was desaturating. He said that she had not. This email about Child K was sent by Dr. Jayaram to his colleagues in 2017 when cases were being collected for presentation to the police. The highlighted part reveals that Letby did call him. This contradiction is clear-cut evidence of perjury. Dr. Jayaram has now been reported to both the police and the General Medical Council. This email first surfaced at the Thirlwell inquiry. They have refused to disclose when they received it. The reason for the refusal needs to be explored. This is Dr. Davy Evans, the Chief Prosecution Expert. He has changed his mind in relation to the deaths of child C, I, and P. In contrast to his trial evidence, he now says injecting air into the stomach does not kill but destabilizes a baby. His final and 10th report on child C, which was written after the trial, is now with Cheshire Police and the Crown Prosecution Service. Despite Dr. Evans saying that the report should be released to the defense, they have refused to. This is an excerpt of a letter that Dr. Evans wrote to Channel 5 on the 3rd of August 2024. In the letter, he sets out his new views about the cause of death of these children. During the trial, injection of air into the stomach was described by the prosecution as Letby's novel way of killing children. Dr. Evans's change of mind must be embarrassing for his fellow prosecution experts, Dr. Bohin and Dr. Manarides, who echoed his pseudoscience. It is particularly surprising that Dr. Manarides, a very reputable forensic pathologist, should have said that injecting air through a feeding tube into the stomach was a cause of death. This is Professor Michael Hall, who was the chief defense expert who was never called to give evidence. He has continued to say that Letby did not get a fair trial. In interviews that he has given with the BBC and the Daily Mail, he has expressed his reservations about the international panel's findings on child I, A and O. In the following slides, I will look at these cases in more detail. This child I slide shows the differing views of the appeal court and the international panel. The appeal court said that the cause of death was the injection of air down the nasogastric tube and air embolism. The international panel said that child I died from lung disease and S. maltophilia colonization, natural causes. S. maltophilia is a multi-drug resistant pathogen that is difficult to eradicate. In my view, the only area of controversy might be the statement that I have highlighted, which says that this is likely a preventable death. This is Professor Sally Kinsey, who was the prosecution hematology expert. She made it clear to the court that she was not an antiphospholipid syndrome expert and she had no neonatal expertise. Professor Kinsey informed the court that child A did not have a blood abnormality and her antibody tests had shown that child A did not have antiphospholipid syndrome. She attributed child A's rash to air embolism. The highlighted part of this slide is taken from a recent review of antiphospholipid syndrome. It states that in very young children, the current guidelines for the diagnosis of antiphospholipid syndrome are not precise and should be revised. The international panel has shown that Dr. Kinsey was mistaken. Both twins, A and B, had evidence of an intravascular clotting disorder. Such a disorder is a characteristic of antiphospholipid syndrome. Both twins also had common risk factors for antiphospholipid syndrome. Children with antiphospholipid syndrome sometimes have a rash which is known as livedo reticularis. It is probable that the very unusual rashes seen in these children were livedo reticularis. Child O was the second of monochorionic triplets. Monochorionic means one placenta. This slide shows the cause of death as given by the appeal court and the international panel. Child O was the first case the police showed Dr. Evans in May 2017. Within 10 minutes, Dr. Evans told them that child O had been murdered. He said that child O had sustained an impact liver injury when she had been attacked. In his original report, Dr. Evans said that child O had started to deteriorate before Letby arrived on the ward. That was subsequently changed. The international panel stated that the liver injury in both child O and the sibling child P was caused by birth injury. I cannot comment on the caesarean section since the obstetric records were not included in the trial evidence. There is no obvious reason why the panel have said that the liver may have been further injured by the blind aspiration of the abdomen. This matter was raised during the trial when the pathologist said that there was no penetration of the liver. Dr. Anna Milan was the consultant clinical scientist in the Liverpool laboratory. She informed the court that her laboratory immunoassay results were very accurate. She also said that by sending a blood sample to Guildford, it would be possible to distinguish what type of insulin had been given. Crucially, she did not tell the court that her laboratory did not test for interference. Only by sending a blood sample to the insulin reference laboratory in Guildford could a completely reliable result suitable for forensic use be guaranteed. This is the advice that Dr. Milan's laboratory issued for child F when there was a low C-peptide to insulin ratio. The highlighted text advises sending a blood sample to Guildford to rule out exogenous insulin if it is suspected. This begs the question, what is the purpose of such advice? The answer is that the immunoassay methodology used in Liverpool does not have the accuracy required in the forensic arena. The defense endocrinologist, Dr. Shakil Rahman, who agreed that child F had been poisoned, should have considered that. This is a case report which has relevance to the Liverpool recommendation. Parents were mistakenly accused of poisoning their child. The laboratory, which used immunoassay, wrongly identified hyperinsulinism. The error was eventually identified by mass spectrometry, the method used by Guildford. The highlighted text makes the point that it is imperative to recognize that immunoassay can give false results when there is interference. Dr. Gwen Walk was the director of the Guildford Laboratory. Through the National External Quality Assessment Scheme, NEQAS, she was responsible for providing oversight of Dr. Milan's laboratory in Liverpool. NEQAS samples are routinely analyzed by external laboratories for quality assessment. Dr. Walk told the court that the Liverpool laboratory performed very well, despite a very inaccurate insulin C-peptide result about 6 weeks after blood from child L was tested. Dr. Walk did not inform the court that where insulin poisoning is suspected, mass spectrometry is now the assay of choice. This is very surprising in view of the comments she made many years earlier as co-author of a paper on the forensic aspects of insulin. I have highlighted the text in that paper in which she specifically says that in the forensic situation, immunoassay is likely to be displaced by mass spectrometry. Child Y was not on the indictment because child Y had congenital hyperinsulinism. The relevance of child Y is that initially child Y was identified by prosecution experts as the third case of insulin poisoning. Details about child Y were not disclosed to the defense. During the trial, the prosecution insisted that hyperinsulinism with a low C-peptide could only mean one thing, poisoning. Knowing that the prosecution experts had initially been wrong would have been very useful to the defense. This is Professor Peter Hindmarsh, the prosecution endocrinology expert. He claimed that children had been poisoned by adding about 0.6 ml of insulin to each feeding bag. The international panel experts say that his calculations were incorrect. They say that because insulin sticks to plastic, a volume 10 times greater would have been required. The total volume of insulin needed would have been 6 or 7 vials. It should be noted that there was no insulin missing from the ward and none was found in Letby's home. Professor Jane Hutton is a professor of statistics at Warwick University. She signed a service contract with Cheshire Police to provide statistical advice. At the insistence of the prosecution, her contract was abruptly terminated. She now claims that the Crown Prosecution Service broke the law by instructing the police to desist from any further statistical investigation. The consequence of having no statistical advice was the scientifically flawed duty roster, which played such a prominent role during the trial. This bogus roster will have undoubtedly influenced the jury. Eventually, someone in the Crown Prosecution Service will need to be held accountable for the decision to instruct the police to cancel Professor Hutton's contract. Stephanie Davies was the senior coroner's officer. In 2017, when an investigation was being considered, she was asked by Assistant Chief Constable Darren Martland to review the coroner's cases. In a 3-hour review, she discovered that there were bits of evidence missing and deaths could not be explained. This review was never disclosed to the defense. Stephanie Davies has said that the senior investigating officer, D.S. Paul Hughes, subsequently told her that her review was one of the main reasons that the police decided to launch an investigation. One person who did have a major influence on the launching of the police investigation was Dr. Ravi Jayaram. This is an email he sent to his colleagues at the start of the preparation of the cases that would eventually be presented to the police. In the email, he advises his colleagues to choose cases where Letby was present and in close proximity to incubators so that the police interest could be piqued. It was shortly afterwards that he submitted his own case about child K, in which he said that Letby called him. Early in the trial, Mr. Myers made application for disclosure of cases that the police had investigated when Letby was not present. The prosecution objected on the grounds that such cases were not relevant. Judge Goss agreed with the prosecution and the application was refused. At the conclusion of the prosecution case, Mr. Myers asked for the case against Letby to be dismissed on the grounds that there was no case to answer. Judge Goss again refused. One of the reasons for doing so was that when babies collapsed, Letby was always present at the incubator or at the cot side. Surely this is exactly what you might expect if you do not look at cases when Letby is not present. This is Professor Gisli Gudjonsson, a forensic psychologist and an expert in confession evidence. Following the trial, he conducted interviews with Letby. Letby kept a diary and wrote numerous notes which were found in her home. During the trial, the prosecution very selectively chose some notes which they claimed were evidence of confession. An example of one note was, "I am evil, I did this." At trial, the defense argued that the notes showed a woman in deep anguish. Professor Gudjonsson agrees with the defense and says that these were not confession notes. He also stated that the alleged confession notes likely influenced the jury and affected their consideration of other evidence. Why did Mr. Myers not call any defense experts? Here are some possible reasons. Mr. Myers initially requested that his experts testify immediately after the prosecution experts. The prosecution objected. They said that Letby would need to give evidence first because her experts might contradict evidence she had already agreed in police interviews. Judge Goss ruled in favor of the prosecution. This meant that in some cases defense experts might have needed to give evidence many months after the prosecution case had been presented. This was a very complex trial with a wide range of expertise being required. Some necessary experts were not in Mr. Myers' defense team. If a statistician, a forensic toxicologist, and a forensic psychologist had been involved, it is very likely that Letby would not currently be in prison. A major problem for Mr. Myers was trying to mount a defense in a trial where the fundamentals of the case were based on junk science. For example, in his report on Child A, Professor Hall had said that the cause of death was unascertained, but air embolism could not be excluded. This would have given Mr. Myers a dilemma. Would calling Professor Hall have helped or hindered his case? Lastly, in the very important insulin cases, the defense experts agreed with the prosecution. Professor Hall said that he would defer to Professor Hindmarsh, and Dr. Rahman said that he would agree with Professor Hindmarsh. After the trial, Dr. Evans said that he had never heard of insulin assay by mass spectrometry. It is likely that Dr. Rahman, a district general endocrinologist, was also not aware of it. Otherwise, why would he have agreed? This is Dr. William Yoxall. He was Director of Neonatology at Liverpool Women's Hospital. After the trial, Cheshire Police asked him to undertake an audit of the time Letby worked at Liverpool Women's Hospital. Dr. Yoxall is a friend of Chester neonatal lead, Dr. Stephen Breary. Dr. Stephen Breary told the Thirlwell inquiry that it is likely that Letby had assaulted or murdered more babies before June 2015. Dr. Yoxall's audit could hardly be viewed as independent because of that friendship. This is Mr. Richard Baker, KC, who represents some of the families. Letby worked at Liverpool Women's Hospital briefly in 2012 and 2015. She had mentors and was closely supervised by senior nurses. Mr. Baker informed the Thirlwell inquiry that the audit had shown endotracheal tube dislodgement to be 40 times higher than normal on Letby's shifts. This startling revelation provoked a strong reaction. Many statisticians and medical specialists wrote to the Thirlwell inquiry saying that this was misleading and unrealistic. At the time, Sarah Napton wrote an article in the Telegraph in which she said that experts had said that the statistics were not credible. Despite knowing that these statistics were false, the BBC chose to repeat them in a sensational manner in a panorama program in August. The BBC subsequently acknowledged their error and was forced into changing the program on the iPlayer. These are the headlines of an article by Glenn Owen in the Mail on Sunday. Noteworthy are his comments about the two journalists, Judith Moritz and Jonathan Coffey. This is the most recent financial report of the Thirlwall inquiry. As of the 31st of March 2025, the total cost has been almost £16 million. It is likely that the eventual cost will be substantially more than 20 million. The Thirlwall inquiry is predicated on Letby being guilty. At the time of these events, the president of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health was Professor Nina Modi. She submitted a statement to the inquiry, but was never invited to give evidence. This should not, however, be surprising, as Professor Modi was a member of Professor Shu Li's international panel of experts. The panel found no crimes had been committed at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Was this a modern-day witch hunt? The closer one looks at the Letby case, it becomes very apparent that Letby was consistently targeted by both consultants and the police. This is a short excerpt of the narrative when the consultants met with DCS Nigel Wenham and DS Paul Hughes on the 15th of May 2017. The consultants informed them that when babies die or collapse, unlike other nurses, Letby is always present. It had got to the point that if Letby was on duty, they feared something would happen. All the doctors were agreed. I have highlighted where Dr. Jayaram assures them that they are not on a witch hunt, but Letby was present on too many occasions. He never informs the police that Letby worked more shifts than other nurses. The police were overawed by the consultants. They believed Letby was guilty from the start. Their principal focus in their subsequent investigation was to gather evidence to confirm their bias. Letby, who was very competent and hard-working, found the hounding of her by the consultants bewildering and difficult to comprehend. She asked Catherine de Berger, head of occupational health, why Dr. Jayaram and Dr. Breary hated her so much. This very interesting lecture by an academic, Dr. Peter Hayes, compares historical witch hunts with the Lucy Letby case. If you do view it, you will see that there are many similarities. And finally, could this be among the greatest miscarriages of justice in British legal history? Hopefully, we will soon get the answer from the CCRC.